Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Ashok and Rishi, wonderful to see you guys. And
Nice to see
since we
you.
had 40 minutes, probably 35 minutes now, I will accelerate, our conversation. Keeping in mind that the conference theme is global disruption and transformation in higher education, and within that, our session is focusing on research in the new world. I will take the first, 3, 4 minutes, and then I will hand over to you. And you will have about 10 minutes apiece to talk about, what was on your mind. And subsequently, we will have another 10 minutes or so for us to have a conversation on topics that may be of mutual interest. And at the end, I will take a few minutes to summarize. So let me just make a few comments of research in the context of global disruption. One is that we are seeing a lot of technology enter research. So, as an example, business analytics are being used, for example, in pharmaceutical research, and we also are beginning to use business analytics not only in healthcare, but if you're looking at the fintech area, or if we're looking at new technologies that are being brought into place, taking advantage of IoTs and so on. But anyway, so I was very fortunate to be involved in a program about a year ago called WebHub, where we had wonderful conversation between academics of Indian origin who were abroad, as well as academics that were residential. And one of the ideas that came up was to focus on problems and opportunities that were worth taking advantage of, and the development of research clusters. So, for example, there's a research cluster in pharma that is beginning to emerge around Hyderabad. Bangalore, Rishi, where you are, has multiple research clusters already in place. But the idea was to bring together academia, industry, and indeed government to see if we could lay the path. And related to that, then was this, which cluster, if we're talking about clusters, what are the sectors that we could focus on where India could actually take the lead, globally? We all know that no matter where you go, you will find doctors of Indian origin. If you go to Terra del Fuego at the southern tip of Argentina, I'm sure you'll find Indian doctors there. When you ask people, where do nurses come from? The first answer is Philippines. But you press further, and the second answer is Kerala. It's not even India. The answer, they go straight to Kerala. So we're producing doctors and we're producing nurses. Why can we not integrate and really take a lead in the healthcare sector to talk about medical technology, etc., and look at the entire ecosystem? So the second thing would be, some idea about what clusters could India take the lead in. A third element, which was actually touched upon in the previous sections, was really related to collaboration. And collaboration is on multiple dimensions. One is collaboration across borders. Another could be collaboration that is multidisciplinary. When I was in Singapore, one of my friends was one of my colleagues was from MIT. His name was Tom Magnanti, and he was the president of Singapore University of Technology and Design. And he made the comment that India has two great brands, IITs and IIMs. Professor Mishra, I think IISc should have been included in that as well. But his comment was that India has two great brands. How come they don't work together? So if we look at this context of taking basic research to market, from lab to market, why isn't an Indian Institute of Sciences working with in the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore? And how can we work collaboratively across organizations to accelerate the process? Another element of collaboration really is that we need to stretch the boundaries of what we consider disciplines. For a long time, people have talked about research and programs, doctoral programs related to STEM, STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, and math. I would like to add a second M to it, which is medicine, because today we are beginning to use technology in medicine as well. And I might like to add a third M to it, which is management. So why can't we have science, technology, engineering, math, medicine, and management? So the need to collaborate, I think, is very critical. And the global climate that we're facing is that life cycles are getting accelerated in all kinds of industries. So this collaboration, which may have been sequential, let's say from science into basic science into applied, now needs to be done in parallel. So we need to be perhaps holding hands together and working on some problems. Then a common issue to research really is, where do we find the talent and what do we do about the talent? So these are some things that were on my mind. I would love to hear, what is on your mind, and then we'll try to integrate it all in the last 5 minutes or so. So, Rishi, over to you, and then after that, Ashok, over to you.
Yeah, many thanks, Raj, and thanks to Emma for inviting me to this panel. Good morning, Professor Mishra. Good to see you again. So I was kind of looking at this whole question of research from a slightly different angle than what Raj started with. So I just completed teaching my strategy implementation course to the MBA students a few days ago. And as I was teaching this course, there were several questions that came up that looked to me we need research to solve. So I thought I would share some of these problems because particularly in India, and I think Raj sort of alluded to this in a way, we have no shortage of policies. We do come up with lots of documents, but often we don't get the results we intend. And one of the reasons for this is often claimed to be our poor implementation capabilities. So I think strategy implementation, policy implementation, whatever you want to call it, is very critical to India achieving its goals in the years ahead. The first question which came up in the discussion in the class is, what is an effective leadership style in India? What kind of leadership style produces the right outcomes? We often read in the media these days of these very hot-headed, very alpha male type startup entrepreneurs who seem to be achieving results, but also seem to be helping their, or at least allowing their organizations to implode along the way. So while that might be good in getting some immediate results, it doesn't seem to be a long-term sustainable solution. On the other hand, when we look at research in India, and there was a gentleman called Professor JBP Sinha, who did a lot of pioneering research on management and leadership styles about 30 years ago. And he found at that time that the most effective leadership style in India is what he called nurturant task leadership. Nurturant in the sense that it's more like father to son, very motivational, encouraging, that kind of a style, but also with a strong task orientation. And this strong task orientation was required to counter as a counter force to some of the broad trends in society to slack off and so on. So for many years, this NT leadership or nurturant task leadership was believed to be an effective leadership style in India. But is it still so? I mean, when we look at some of the recent research on millennials or Gen Z or some of the new people in the workforce, it looks like the things that drive them are quite different from the things that drove young managers of 30 or 40 years ago. Whether this nurture and task leadership is the appropriate leadership style today is something I'm wondering about. And I've been looking for good research which can tell me what are the effective leadership styles in the Indian workforce of today, and I'm afraid I've not come across it. So I think that's issue number one. The second issue which came up from our strategy implementation course was an interesting observation by Professor Donald Sull at MIT. So he's written several very interesting articles on strategy implementation. And he reports a very interesting paradox. He says that, ironically enough, when execution is not going well, putting in place tighter controls and tighter management may actually make things worse rather than better. Though most companies often think that the way to improve execution at that stage is to make all the controls much stricter and to do much more monitoring and so on. And he attributes the dysfunctionality of this approach to the fact that many of the problems in execution come not because of poor management, but because maybe the environment itself has changed. Maybe the solution which was proposed is no longer the correct one. In other words, there is need for agility in the organization, and sometimes how you go about implementing the strategy might need to change to reflect the changes in the environment. So the question is really, how do you make what is called loose, tight governance work? There are some things on which you need to be maybe a little loose. There are some things you need to be tight. And interestingly enough, even our new education policy believes that some kind of governance approach like this is important to make the Indian higher education system work well. But how does this work in practice? What are the characteristics of such a system? I think this is an area which certainly needs more research. Third point. So I, some years ago, read this very interesting book by General McChrystal, one of the leaders of the US Army in Iraq. And he came up with this very interesting idea that the old command and control style of the army doesn't work anymore, particularly in guerrilla type situations where you're dealing with a very fragmented but a very determined opponent, which works in a very decentralized way. So his answer to this was to say that you need to have an approach which he called team of teams, which he said you need a lot of decentralized teams, each of which has a kind of collective intelligence with the other teams. So there's a combined collective intelligence between the teams, but each team needs to have the autonomy to work. This seems to have a lot of applicability in the business and management sector as well as perhaps in government, because we know that we have national policies, but we have lots of regional variations. So policies need adaptation to work in different contexts. So this team of teams approach seems to be quite relevant. But I've been looking for good research on telling you how you can make this team of teams work, particularly in a corporate or organizational context. And I have not been too successful in finding this so far. So that's a third area which I would underline. The fourth area which I would like to talk about is something that Raj again alluded to, the advent of new technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, etc. Many commentators in the last 4 or 5 years have argued that an important skill for managers in this context is to be able to work at the human-machine interface. Machines are going to be a reality, and here I'm talking about virtual machines, not so much about physical machines, and these virtual machines will take care of automation, they will do optimization and so on. But human beings are still needed to bring in the creativity, to bring in the imagination, to bring in the coordination that's required for things to work together. So how do you actually make this human-machine interface work? I know people are doing research in this area. A few days ago, I heard a very interesting talk by Fanish Puranam on the same AIMA platform as part of the AIMA National Council, but there's need for much more work in this area. Finally, the last point I would like to make is coming back to where I started, which is with the role of the CEO and the leadership. So another set of commentators have been arguing that the role of the CEO is changing in a data-driven world. Earlier, the CEO had to step in to substitute when there was a lack of data. What I mean is to come in with the intuition that was required to take a decision when there was not adequate data. But today, with all companies generating so much data, there's really no need for that kind of intuitive approach anymore, or at least most of the time there isn't. So people are calling the role of the CEO now as that of the orchestrator of experiments, the person who needs to encourage and oversee the conduct of numerous experiments that will generate the data as well as the insights, which will allow you to take the right decisions. So once again, what do we need to do to train CEOs to fulfill this role? How do you make CEOs who can be these creative or orchestrators? I think that's another issue which I think would be very interesting to research. So I just thought I'll share some of the kind of emerging research issues, which I think are very important, which just came out from our strategy implementation course this term. And I'd love to take this discussion forward. Thank you again, Raj, and look forward to listening to Professor Mishra.
Thank you, Rishi. This is very interesting. One of the things I tell my students is that before they get their degree, they need to teach me something. So it looks like the conversation that you've had with your students has led to questions that need to be answered rather than answers themselves. Over to you, Professor Mishra.
Thank you, Raj, and thanks for initiating the discussion. And Rishi, you mentioned a lot of interesting things. I'll keep my remarks a little bit more simplistic and see how that resonates with you. Dr. Verghese talked a lot about globalization and education. And actually, we are in the global economy era in which education takes central place. Higher education is, to me, is the backbone of a country's future. No country has prospered or advanced technologically or economically without a robust higher education system. You can name a whole bunch of them, China being the latest, but America, Germany, France, UK, and many, many more. A country which has a superior higher education system really in the global world has an edge in today's economy and growth. In India, we have, I recently had a fireside chat with Naushad Forbes, so got this, that there are 1,076 institutions in India. And if you start saying, okay, how many of them are of global standards, especially in terms of research, you would find it wanting to go beyond, at the best, you will go to 100 at the best, which is also unlikely. So institutions of higher education are basically temples, and I call them temples because people go to worship in temples and all that. They should go to universities to worship, of learning where knowledge is transmitted through the teaching mode and new knowledge is created through the research mode. Therefore, research holds central place. Any universities that you talk of, whether it's MIT or Tsinghua or Cambridge, Oxford, they have a good, very good education system, but a very high standard of research, which is what we have to aspire for. We have to have global standards for teaching and research. Research really gives institutions an extra edge. And I keep harping on this because I don't think Indian institutions, I don't feel that Indian institutions have given enough stress on research. Students, as was mentioned a little bit about doctoral students, especially, and I'll concentrate on that because we're talking of research, must be aware of the knowledge that is being transmitted to their counterparts in other parts of the world. So our doctoral students have to be on par with a doctoral student in USA, Germany, Cambridge, in the UK, and so on. And that you have to raise the standard. There's no choice. We just have to do it. Superior education and research will attract, of course, excellent students and faculty, as we have seen in several countries. Alongside, we have to give greater stress on creativity, innovation, and generation of new ideas in the higher education system. So research is there, but research leading to, of course, there is a Pastor's quadrant. Research is basic research, that applied research, but that which leads to creativity, innovation, and generation of new ideas, leading to entrepreneurship and startups. And that culture in India is fortunately coming now, startups. But research has to emerge from these temples of learning, as I call them. Investment in people is very crucial for the knowledge economy. We have to invest in people, whether it is a student, whether it is a faculty, administrators. We have to invest in the best institutions. Rishi talked about CEOs and what kind of role CEOs play and maybe training programs for them. In our country, in India, do we have any sort of training programs for those who become heads of institutions, vice chancellors, directors, and so on, presidents in private universities? That is a must because they are essentially the CEO of that educational hub. Research, as also mentioned, can be aided by artificial intelligence, but to what extent that we have to see. Technology to help data generation and data analysis, and of course, help in the research. Today, AI is being used for development of drugs. AI has been used for pesticide, spreading pesticides over farms, used for developing new materials. I'm just giving some ideas. And of course, all the high-end control systems and the like. Alongside, we have to give a lot of stress on public policy. What is the public policy in education? What is the public policy in research? Documents are there, but this has to be also stressed upon. Disruption that has taken place, which is the topic here, in higher education because of intervention of technology, actually gives us an excellent opportunity to enhance stress and research. This provides an opportunity for creativity, innovation, and whatever I mentioned earlier. Through interactions between institutions, collaboration was talked about. And now that we have got used to, including this, this conference, exchanging ideas in the video mode, these are all disruptive technologies which are change the whole way that we structure classes, teaching, conferences. Same thing can be applied to research. Can we exchange ideas across institutions, synergize the expertise that is available in one institution and the other? And Raj, you were absolutely right. We should synergize the expertise between IITs and IIMs. Recently, I heard a talk by a professor from AIMS who was talking about neuroscience, and she was talking about how interactions with IIT Delhi have led to lots of advances in that area. So development of universities has to be to global standards in this knowledge economy. Investment in people is key. If we don't invest in the right people, right from the leadership to the faculty to the students, we will not, and administrators overall, we will not achieve our goals. We have to do that. Alongside, we have to have outstanding leadership. Governance systems have to be looked into. And I question this when I'm on some boards and some advisory committees of some private institutions. And when I see the governance, it's research. Research means development of new ideas, taking things forward, improving the system, improving the country. Is that given enough importance in the governance? Governance sometimes becomes very basic routine, and that has to change. Maybe one can have two kinds of committees. One would be the governance committee or the board of governance, and then another one which leads to out-of-the-box thinking, innovation, research, and the like. So coming back, just to summing it up, a huge opportunity because of this disruption to think out of the box, come up with new ideas, not just being teaching shops or universities, but becoming real hubs of research. Of course, investment is required, both in people and in, if it is science and technology based in equipment. And the biggest thing is the change of the mindset And one of the major change in the mindset is what was also alluded to is in one of the talks is the interdisciplinary, and I don't call it interdisciplinary anymore because that has a connotation, physics, chemistry interacting, but cross-disciplinary. So interaction between science, economics, technology, management, these kind of things will also have new things emerge, and that's what we need for the day. And these are some very simplistic thoughts. So I hope it resonates with you, Raj, and my co-panelist, Rishikesh, and I'm happy to.
Yeah, thank you, Ashok. For both of you, I'm going to come up with a common question for discussion. Rishi, you made the point that the world is changing, and so in many cases we're looking at command and control doesn't work. If the world was nicely organized, you could have command and control, but now we've seen the emergence of hybrid organizations. These are, so as an individual, one could be reporting to the area of expertise, let's say business development, the country within which they work, which could be, let's say, India, but it could also be to the product group that they belong to. And let's say in the context of a pharmaceutical company, it could be oncology or cardiology or whatever. So they're really reporting to three boxes. And you mentioned this idea of how do we integrate team across teams, in a team of teams. Now the issue really is that you're talking about multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary thinking, as Ashok just mentioned. And we also are looking at, let's say, development of talent. Now, many years ago, when I was still in Singapore, I estimated the cost of producing a PhD in the US. And the cost was, typically a 5-year program, on paper 4, but a 5-year program. They're getting a stipend of about $4,000 a month at a good university. So that's $50,000 there. Free courses, healthcare, office costs. So the cost was about between $80,000 to $100,000 per year per PhD student. You take it across 5 years, and that's $400,000. We in India cannot afford that. Even in the US, they can't afford it now. So, and then on top of it, we're saying we want individuals who not only have the capacity to think, but who also have multidisciplinary thinking. Now, and the ability, you mentioned that it was important for them to be able to manage things. So when we look at that, is it better perhaps to take people who already have the cross-disciplinary experience and put them into a doctoral program? And how can we accelerate the doctoral programs in such a way so it's not really costing us 5 years? I'm just kind of throwing out a question for you to think of. I'm sure you've worried about this issue, and Ashokji also, your perspective on how we can grow more talent. Of course, institutions have to invest, but also, how can we afford, to generate the kind of faculty and researchers that will be needed in the future? So over to you, Rishi, and then a comment from Ashok, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So I think you have put your finger on an important problem. So let me give you a kind of contrast situation we often face in the IIMs in faculty recruitment. So we look at PhD candidates from a variety of top institutions, but I'm going to just take 2 of them. I'm going to take comparing a candidate who has done his or her PhD in an IIM versus somebody who's done a PhD in an IIT management department. So what we find with the guys who come from IIMs is that they have done often 2 years of coursework. They have a very deep understanding of the discipline. They also have pretty good breadth because the way our doctoral coursework in IIMs is structured, they get an exposure to a lot of different areas. So as a result, if we hire them as a faculty member, they can kind of jump straight into teaching because they got that exposure. They're also able to relate their particular discipline to other disciplines because of the coursework. But sometimes we find that they don't have as much depth in their research as maybe somebody who comes from an IIT. Now, when you look at the person whom we hire from an IIT, it's very different. IITs have very restricted coursework in the PhD program compared to an IIM. So we find that we get very deep disciplinary specialists who have gone, really into their research problem, but they don't know too much outside the research problem. So if you quiz them on anything in an aligned area, they really can't answer that question. So these two, we have, of course, we have people from abroad as well, but I just took this as a kind of, contrast to show what happens when you have two very different kinds of candidates whom you're looking at. And we have found both of these are valuable. I mean, the IIM folks, very good in teaching. If they're also good in research, they pick up speed very fast. The IIT folks come in with their very strong research expertise. So I think my question is it, first of all, is it possible to really have the best of both worlds? Sometimes individual candidates do come with that best of both worlds because they have transcended the boundaries of their respective doctoral programs. But I think there are lots of experiments happening which will make this possible. I know, for example, Fanish at INSEAD has been doing a lot of work on offering doctoral coursework online, on getting institutions to collaborate together to do this. I think we should be more open to these options. This also means we need to look a little bit differently at our workload calculations internally. One of the biggest sources of opposition to having online coursework for PhDs is likely to be from our internal faculty, because they'll say then that won't give us an opportunity to teach the students and it'll affect our workload and things like that. But I think we've really got to ask very basic questions about this.
Thank you, Rishi. Ashokji?
Yeah, lots of questions. Some questions in the chat box also. Raj, any good thing you do in any country, and in any sector, whether it's let's say Mahindra Motors or Reliance or Bharat Forge, they're doing good stuff. Whenever you do good manufacturing, good medicine, you have to spend. There is no choice. As I mentioned, I see higher education is the backbone of a country. If there are extremely well-talented people, they will produce wealth for the country. GDP will go up. So investment in them is a precursor to the growth, as I say it. There is no shortcut to that. Today, we have figure I had was about 30 million students who are going to college. And when you're trying to hire somebody, you say, oh, there's shortage of this and shortage of that talent and shortage of this talent. Why is that with 30 million people, which is greater than the population of Australia, we should be bubbling with talent, even if 10% are of world-class quality. But we don't see that in that experience. In the engineering, everybody in industry always says only 20% of engineers are employable. Why are 80% not employable? Mm-hmm. This disruption that is taking place in the teaching and learning mode can actually be used to advantage if people are willing to collaborate. Since we are in an IIT and IIM scenario, if there is a very good course taught by, let's say, Rishi or some other professor, can the IIMs combine that and say, okay, this course will be transmitted from IIM Bangalore and IIM Ahmedabad and others will take it, free up the time of the faculty to get into research and collaborative mode. NIITs which are short of faculty can do that. So lots of solutions are possible, but if you want good education system, you have to invest in good education. I don't think there's a shortcut, and you need a public policy for that. Does that answer what you were asking, or one more thing?
I think the answer is clear. That, when you want something,
just one last 1 minute or half a minute. There's an industry has to step in. So industry spends, and you must be reading in the papers that a lot of money for technology acquisition. There's that. If they were just to spend a small percentage of that to adopt some universities and take their level forward, so that their leadership and students and faculty are of world class, I think that itself will feed upon itself. So industry has to come in a big way, especially for the research, and research in all areas: economics, management, entrepreneurship, science, technology, social sciences, everything.
Okay, so thanks, Ashokji. I think we started about 5 minutes late, so I'm going to take the liberty of usurping a few minutes here. There are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat box. So I just wanted to plant some ideas are this. Yes, we can share doctoral courses, and others we can possibly bring industry in it. Ashok and Rishiji have come up with one experiment, which is an executive fellows program, sort of equivalent to a DBA. And when you have a chief operating officer of a major company in your class or a chief financial officer, then you kind of get into some questions that need to be addressed at that level. And they bring a lot of talent and experience to the table. And so that just changes the mix of it. So this is perhaps a topic that we should look at in the future. And I will approach the two of you on this issue. Can we bring in experience? Can we bring in cross-disciplinary thinking to begin with? We'll take one or two questions from the chat box. So one question is, what in your view is the role of corporates? What is the role that corporates can play in promoting universities and skilling students? And so either one of you.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think I mentioned that already, that the corporates have to step in and they have to be given the freedom to step in. I think that may be the bigger problem, that they don't have the freedom to step in the government system.
The corporates have been, I was trying to hire somebody at ISP, but Microsoft ended by hiring that person. So my feeling is there should be some collaboration. Maybe if we could have a program where the fellows are coming from industry, and industry should also take academic fellows in their organizations. If we can get that going, particularly in fast-moving areas like artificial intelligence. Rishi, your comment on the role of corporates in education?
So I think it would be very helpful if we could have more courses that are co-taught by industry and academic professors. We tried an experiment this last academic year with a couple of such courses. They certainly involved a lot of effort from both the professor and the corporate partner, but the results were amazing because the students got a wonderful integration of both theory and practice. They got an insight into what's happening today in the industry, which will really help them when they go into the job market. So I'm quite enthused by this, and I'm hoping to encourage more of that in the months ahead.
So thank you. I think we've kind of run out of time, and I'll close it by making a comment on the statement that you just made, Rishi. The best course I have ever taught was in 1998 when I taught a course called Financial Assessment of Strategic Initiatives. It was a course I co-taught with the Chief Financial Officer at Dell. And the students just loved it because while we agreed on the topics, we did not agree on the solutions. And so those students said, this is great. There was no, we weren't asked blind questions. You guys are fighting amongst yourselves. That's the best learning we had. But with that, Ashokji, Rishiji, thanks so much. And I'll be back in touch with you. So I'm coming back to India. And the end of my sabbatical is June. So I hope to see you guys soon. Take care. And thank you, AIMA.
Thank you so much.
Inviting all three of us.